And removing alcohol was the one thing that actually changed everything.
On the mic with us today is Brooke Scheller, a doctor of clinical nutrition, motivational speaker, and author of How to Eat to Change How You Drink.
The goal of the book is to really utilize nutrition and natural healing methods to support changing your relationship with alcohol. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go 100% alcohol free. But my goal in having you explore this is to just challenge yourself a little bit, right? I always say to people, if you feel terrified at the idea of eliminating alcohol, that means you need to try it.
Dr. Scheller developed the globally recognized and acclaimed functional sobriety program, which offers a revolutionary approach to helping people minimize and eliminate alcohol consumption.
And through that process of eliminating alcohol, it cleared that channel. I'm now more present in my life. I'm now more connected. I'm more aware. I am more in awe of the way that life unfolds.
Whether you are a social drinker, habitual one, or rarely partake, you will find our conversation with Dr. Scheller incredibly illuminating and empowering. I'm your host, Ina Korobkina, founder of Jewel Branding Studios and creator of the Business in Style fashion course for entrepreneurs. And
I'm Ingrid J. Monday, aka Ms. Monday, a photographer and filmmaker and the author of the book, The Secrets of Becoming a Boss Bitch with a Heart of Gold.
welcome to another episode of the Rise Up and Fix It podcast.
So Dr. Brooke Scheller, your book, How to Eat to Change How You Drink, it's just so inspiring. The powerful stories that you shared in your book have the potential to reshape perceptions and alcohol use. Your personal experience of battling alcohol-related liver damage in your early 30s must have had a significant driving force behind the creation of this book. So thank you for sharing your story. I'm curious to know more, and I'm sure our listeners are too. What initially sparked your decision to remove alcohol from your life?
Yeah, well, thank you both for having me on. I'm really excited to be here today, and I love podcast interviews because I'm a talker. So talking is easier for me than writing, and somehow I wrote the book. But um, yeah, it was really through my own experience in really getting to a point in my life where sobriety really became the only option for me. I was someone who was a big drinker for all of my life, and I never knew any other way of living. But what I noticed over time was my alcohol use increased, and the pandemic happened. And like so many people, there was a huge increase in my own drinking during the pandemic. And I saw this happen with people around me. And what's very interesting now is there's a lot of research around increases in drinking during the pandemic. And the irony is actually that prior to quitting drinking myself, I had actually authored a textbook chapter in a textbook on integrative approaches to substance use disorders. And I wrote a chapter on nutrition and supplements for substance use disorders. And I wrote that chapter about 9 months prior to my getting sober. And that book actually published the same month that I quit drinking alcohol, which was June of 2021. And I didn't quit drinking because that book came out. It just happened to kind of align in that way. But when I started on my sobriety journey, I utilized several of those tools that I had researched. I had started making some minor modifications to my diet. I'm a doctor of nutrition, right? So this is my area of expertise. But I also started utilizing some supplements that are really helpful in curbing alcohol cravings and starting to kind of rebalance and support some of the damage that can be caused by alcohol use, which we can talk about later today. And through that process, for me, by the end, I was drinking quite heavily. So if you read my book, you'll hear my story and kind of that progression of how I started as a social drinker, as a teenager, and that kind of uh, evolved over time and over my adult life. Ultimately, to the point where at the end, I was drinking more like daily or almost daily. And I had never anticipated that that was what my life would become. But alcohol, as we know and what we see in the research, is it's an addictive substance. So the more we put it in our body, the more we train our body to kind of need it or want it. And we train ourselves in terms of how it is playing a role in our social lives and our interactions. And so I was about 3 months sober and had the inspiration to write a full book on this topic. It's been just an amazing thing for me to be able to use my expertise in this area that I feel really passionately about.
So, Ina and I come from a background in film, and I'm very aware of how advertising works. And I read in your book, we are all told and we're all brainwashed to think that alcohol is good for us, for our hearts, despite the negative effects it has on our brains. Can you explain to our listeners about these mixed messages and why this is so bad for our health?
For anyone who's listening, if you are new to this conversation about alcohol reduction or new to these kinds of trends and movements toward reducing alcohol, sober curious is kind of that hot term. There's a huge booming non-alcoholic beverage space. Try to do your best while listening to this conversation, not to get linked into any of the feeling like it needs to be all or nothing, right? Because it really doesn't need to be like this is doesn't need to be a conversation about getting sober, right? And you showing up and eliminating alcohol from your life entirely. But what my goal is and my intention is in this conversation is to help you kind of dig a little bit deeper in the role that this is playing in your life. And so when it comes to advertising and how we utilize alcohol in our lives, I mean, what we see in the media and social media and again in TV, film, and all of that is this is what we need to be doing in order to have fun. This is what, you know, all of our interactions are based off of. And for many, many people, alcohol is kind of that through line that makes its way into every interaction. It's involved in our family lives, it's involved in our relationships and our friendships, in our co-working relationships. And so it's really ingrained and in our society, and that is kind of by design, right? Alcohol and big alcohol makes a lot of money, right? There's a huge industry behind this that wants us to drink alcohol because they're making a lot of money off of us. And there's a really great book in the quit lit genre. Quit lit is what we call these books about being sober, sober curious, called Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker. And this book has a ton more information about the advertising and more specifically toward women and how there is this kind of portrayal of this is what, you know, helps you connect to other people. This is what makes you more social. This makes you more sexy. This makes you more, desirable to be around men, right? Like if you're one of the guys and you're drinking beer with them or you're drinking whiskey with them, right? So advertising is for everyone around alcohol, but in specifically women are kind of targeted as well with these skinny cocktails and mom juice and all of these other things, right? So there's a huge piece of it that is run by the industry, the big alcohol industry that is wanting you to purchase and buy the products. And unfortunately, there's a statistic that if everybody actually drank the quote unquote recommended 1 or 2 drinks per day, that alcohol sales would be slashed by something like 80%, right? So we know that people are drinking more than they kind of quote unquote should be. And unfortunately, right, so we have the industry that's promoting alcohol. You want to drink this substance, right? And on the flip side of it, we have, the health piece of it, which for so many of us, we've been kind of told since the early 90s that exactly like you said, Ingrid, that there's these kind of potential quote unquote health benefits to drinking alcohol. Well, over the last about 5 years, there has been a huge body of research that's actually refuted a lot of those potential benefits and has shown that those benefits maybe aren't really there based on more current research. So while there was research in the early 90s, or excuse me, late 90s, early 2000s around these potential cardiovascular benefits, there was a huge study in 2022 that basically said that no amount of alcohol is beneficial for cardiovascular health. And this was looked at in a much larger study size over a longer period of time, and was a more robust study. So unfortunately, those benefits that we thought were there are not isn't necessarily the case. And what we're seeing in the industry is movement toward less alcohol. So the World Health Organization put out a statement a few years ago saying that no amount of alcohol is safe. And in 2022, Canada changed its guidance away from the 1 or 2 drinks per day to 1 or 2 drinks per week, which is quite a stark difference than what we've heard in the US. And the US only changes guidance every 5 years. So in 2025, we will see what the US government says about alcohol consumption and recommendations.
Fascinating.
Mhm.
Wow. I really enjoyed reading your book, and you mentioned some common misconceptions about drinking. Can you name a couple of them? I found many of them surprising. Can you share with the listener some common misconceptions?
Yeah, I think that many of us think that alcohol is going to lower stress. And this is a comment that I get often on social media because I talk about this a lot. The alcohol actually is a driver of stress. But we often think that this is something that relieves our stress, right? That if I've had a stressful day, if I've had, a tough time emotionally or in the workplace or in a relationship, the reaction is let me have a drink, or oh, I need a drink at the end of the day, right? However, alcohol actually increases cortisol levels, cortisol being our stress hormone. And because of that, it's actually over time worsening our stress. So we get this initial kind of feeling or sensation of relaxation. Most people claim that that lasts about 20 minutes. It's part of the reason why when we have one drink, we want to have another drink, we want to have another drink. We're kind of chasing that good feeling, right? And we don't have any additional benefit from that, right? The first kind of initial sensation that we get is an increase or an elevation in dopamine. It's an increase in GABA, which is our body's kind of relaxing neurotransmitter. But really, over time, it's worsening stress. So it's making us less able to cope with stress. It's making us less tolerable to stress. And cortisol levels are something to consider for both men and women. Women more so are often affected by cortisol because it can affect hormone production. And so over time, that can lead to other imbalances in the body from a hormone perspective, metabolism, thyroid, etc. So that's kind of one of the big ones that I think is out there, is that there's an argument of, well, stress is bad for you too, right? So you should drink alcohol because it's lowering your stress, when really it's actually making stress worse.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The other ones that you mentioned are that many people think that genes play a role, but you say in your book it's not the definitive role. Just because it's in your family history doesn't mean that you're gonna develop an alcohol reliance. And then it's basically a reinforced behavior, and we believe that we need it, and also that the the concept of will, that somehow we're weak-willed, which is absolutely not true. There's biological systems in place, as you mentioned in the book, that make it a very addictive thing. After like one glass, you want to have more, like you just said.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the genetics, yeah, I think this is an area where there is a lot of misconception, because we've all heard, right? Oh, well, it's in the family, right? It's, oh, well, that person who maybe has a alcohol use disorder or a tendency to overdrink, well, they have a parent who's an alcoholic or a grandparent who's an alcoholic, and that it kind of quote unquote runs in the family. And there's a big misconception around this, because it's not like there's one single gene that says this is the gene that makes you more or less likely to develop an alcohol use disorder. There's a slew of different genes that have been associated with a desirability for alcohol. So some people process alcohol more efficiently than others through their liver enzymes. So some people feel better drinking it while others feel worse. The people who feel worse drinking it don't usually ever drink enough that they develop more of that addiction to it. But there's even genes like ones that influence our dopamine and our dopamine levels in the brain. So if we have lower dopamine production, we may be seeking substances that are giving us that dopamine hit. But there's ones that are kind of seemingly unrelated, like even genes that affect our hunger and satiety hormones have been linked to developing alcohol use disorder. And so it's not necessarily this cut and dry genetic piece. But when it comes to families and how this is potentially influenced in families, also has a lot to do with our environment and how we're raised, right? If we're raised in a family where we see this behavior and it seems kind of quote unquote normal, it's not abnormal if you, when you are becoming an adult, are taking on those similar behaviors to your parents or people who are influencing you. So there's also kind of that nature versus nurture discussion point too.
In my family, we drank a lot. Like I grew up, I think I had my first sip of beer when I was 14. And the crazy thing is because I was so used to drinking so much before I got pregnant the first time with my first son, I remember thinking, it felt like a big deal, like not to drink. So when I got pregnant, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to drink again. But I felt amazing not drinking. And I couldn't believe that I was actually holding back getting pregnant because I wanted to drink. Like, how messed up was that? Can you tell us why quitting alcohol is so good for our bodies? I know you already talked about it, but can you also explain what changes did you go through, Brooke? And what did you notice when you quit drinking?
Yeah, so there's a lot of pieces to it, right? The first thing that I'll kind of touch on in your question, Ingrid, is about the fun part, right? Because that's everybody's fear, is that if you take away alcohol or you don't have access to it or you're having to stop, quote unquote, that it's just going to like rip all of the fun out of your life. You're never going to be able to celebrate. You're never going to be able to enjoy yourself. And some of that has to do with how you've associated alcohol with fun throughout the course of your life, right? So there's research that actually shows the earlier that we associate alcohol with pleasure and fun and connection, the more that is kind of reiterated as adults, right? So if we have since at a younger age associated fun and pleasure with alcohol, then as adults, it's going to be fun and pleasure is because of alcohol, right? So for so many people though, they've never really experienced life without alcohol, right? Like every wedding you've gone to, probably alcohol was involved, or most of your social interactions probably had alcohol. I know for me, I never even really thought about it. Like I never even really thought I had another choice to not drink. It just was so ingrained in my lifestyle that I just didn't really know another way. I didn't know that there was another option. So there is definitely this thought process in the beginning, especially if you go completely alcohol free, where you're feeling like the rug was just ripped out from under you, right? Like, well, great, there goes everything that I've ever known and all the fun, quote unquote, that I've ever had. And there's a story that I tell in the book about the first time I went out with friends of mine. I was about 3 weeks sober and it was a Friday night. I very vividly remember it. And I kind of went into it like bracing for impact of, okay, I'm not going to drink. It's going to be fine. I'm going to have fun. It's going to be great. Right. And I danced with my friends more that night than I had in probably 5 years. And I realized that if I were drinking, I would be standing by the bar, worried about keeping my spot so that I could get my next drink. I would be, talking to strange people for whatever reasons unknown, right? Because I was not drinking alcohol, I was engaged, I was present, I was in control of my choices, right? I left early that night. I had a good night of sleep. I woke up not hungover and I thought, okay, I can do this, right? I enjoyed myself and I didn't need to have alcohol to do it. So some of it is just kind of proving to yourself that you can. do it. And that's a little bit about what this exploration can be about for you if you're listening, right? Again, you don't have to go fully sober. But to answer the second part of your question, Ingrid, one of the things that I felt really passionately about doing in my book was talking about some of these areas that we really don't think alcohol is influencing. They seem a little more disconnected. Maybe again, like cortisol, right? We think it's helping our stress. Oh, wait, it's actually not. Okay, that's a little surprising. Well, in the book, and really part of my functional sobriety approach is around three key systems. So, one is the gut, and many people don't recognize how much alcohol is influencing the gut microbiome, contributing to issues of digestion and absorption. Many nutrient deficiencies are caused by that. Also, our hormones, right? So we talked a little bit about hormones, but all of the sex hormones are affected by alcohol use. And I know those things kind of seem a little bit separate, right? But because alcohol affects the liver, it affects the cortisol, it affects actually a lot of systems that influence hormone balance. So both in women, so estrogen, progesterone, especially important around perimenopause, menopause era. I work with a lot of women in that kind of age frame, but also for men because alcohol lowers testosterone levels, right? And again, these are things that we don't necessarily talk about on a day-to-day basis. We hear like, just like you said, Ingrid, well, it's bad for the brain, right? And it does. It breaks down our gray matter, our white matter. It actually increases the aging of our brain. So it ages us by several more years in advance the more we drink. And so it really does have a lot of impacts that go beyond just the liver, which is kind of what people initially tie it to. But it's all of these other things that can be affected because of it.
That's amazing. Yeah, one part in your book really stood out for me where, and sometimes someone phrases it in such a way where it really has an impact on you. And that part for me was where you said that alcohol is class one, carcinogenic, in the same grouped together with asbestos, radiation, what was the other one? Tobacco. And, we wouldn't consider a little bit of that stuff safe. Why would we consider alcohol, even a small amount of alcohol, safe? So that was like a huge, that wake up call for me. So ever since I finished reading your book, I've been drinking a lot of sparkling water. So thank you for inspiring me.
Sparkling water is a great alternative. That's what helped me a lot in the beginning. I actually have a LaCroix tattoo on my leg, which is a sobriety tattoo, but I really credit LaCroix for helping me get through some tough times in the beginning.
That's cute.
But yeah, so a class one carcinogen means that it is known to cause cancer in humans. And the research is quite strong in that. That's what makes it class one. And so, yeah, exactly like you said, Ina, we wouldn't look at a little bit of radiation as good. We wouldn't look at it, a little bit of asbestos as good, right? And I always use those examples, a long list of other things on that list. But I use those examples because those are ones that we all look at and go, oh, yeah. We quit smoking. We avoid we don't want extra radiation from x-rays and these other things. We avoid, we all know those commercials for mesothelioma from asbestos, right? And so when we think of it that way, even in small doses, we wouldn't call those things healthy, right? And yet we're doing this with alcohol. So some of that is marketing campaigns from big alcohol. And if you again look at the research, there's some really interesting graphs of when the original research came out saying that alcohol has cardiovascular benefits. The sales in wine basically doubles and continues to rise after that, right? So that had a major impact on people's consumption. And I can't tell you how often I hear people say to me, well, I thought I was doing something good by doing this.
Yeah, I was going to touch upon your 30-day program that you feature in your book. What does this program involve, just for our listeners to be aware of?
Yeah, so the goal of the book is to really utilize nutrition and natural healing methods to support changing your relationship with alcohol. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go 100% alcohol free. But my goal in having you explore this is to just challenge yourself a little bit, right? I always say to people, if you feel terrified at the idea of eliminating alcohol, that means you need to try it, right? Because there's probably ways that alcohol is influencing your brain, your behavior, your lifestyle, your career, your goals in a lot of ways. And I talk about goals a lot in the book before we even get into the 30-day program, because one of the things that became very, very evident to me early on in my sobriety journey is that while I thought alcohol was giving me something, I'll use like in quotes, something, it was actually taking away and creating a lot of blocks in my life. And from a perspective of career, physical health, mental health, financial health, right? Alcohol was holding me back in many, many ways. And this is not something that's unique to me. This is across the board with a lot of people who are regular drinkers, right? And removing alcohol was the one thing that actually changed everything, right? That I felt like for so many years I was like clawing uphill to, you know, get get my health on track, to get closer toward the goals that I had. In my first year alcohol free, I achieved three of the big goals that I had had in my life. One was starting a business. The second was writing a book, which if you would have asked me a couple of years ago if I would write a book on sobriety, I would have laughed. And the third was running a half marathon. So these were things that I was putting off because I was prioritizing happy hour, right? I was prioritizing alcohol over everything else, over most else. So when I started working on this, it was really important for me to use my area of expertise, which is nutrition, and help to support people in using these tools. So the 30-day guide is really just a framework of how to eat, how to structure your meals, how to choose foods like incorporating more protein to stabilize your blood sugar, right? To jump back to one of you asked me about the willpower topic before, and willpower is kind of a BS thing, right? Because usually our body is telling us that we need something. If you have a really strong urge or craving, that is your body sending you a signal saying you need something. Oftentimes, at the end of a long day, if you are having an intense craving for alcohol, you probably have low blood sugar. And that may be because you've gone a long period of time without eating, right? So most people have tough time at 5 o'clock, 4 or 5 o'clock. Well, when was the last time you ate? Was it lunch 5 hours ago? Because if so, you're hungry, right? And that's manifesting as an alcohol craving. So if you can have something to eat in the afternoon, a high protein snack, that can actually make it easier for you to forego having to white knuckle it and rely on willpower. And it's when we're in that state of low blood sugar that we don't have as much control over our choices, right? When we're in a state of low blood sugar, our body is basically sending signals like I need fuel, or I am going to need a nap, or I'm going to crash, right? So by incorporating more protein in the afternoon, so that could be a protein bar, that could be some hard-boiled eggs, that could be an apple with some almond butter, that could be one of my favorite things is like deli turkey roll-ups, right? Something with lots of protein, a little bit of healthy carbs with fiber in there is a really great way to help balance and stabilize that blood sugar. And for so many people, thirst can also be a trigger. And there's also this whole like hand to mouth thing that happens, right? Of like, if you take away the alcohol, like you're like, what do I do with my hands, right? So having a seltzer water or having a non-alcoholic beverage alternative or something is a really good way for you to kind of help keep that mental craving away. There are some supplements that you can use, and I talk about supplements a fair amount in the book because especially the fact that when we drink, we deplete out a lot of our nutrients. that we need to replenish these. But there's one that I use a lot called L-theanine, which is really good for staving off those sugar cravings as well as alcohol cravings. And so, yeah, there's a lot of tools in the book that can kind of walk you through and help you build a nutrition plan that can support if you want to change your drinking habits.
Very cool. I'm curious about how you work privately with clients. So, going back to what you were saying,
Mhm,
that a lot of the goals that you were finally able to achieve, your top goals, was when you
mhm.
finally stopped drinking. And it almost sounds like alcohol can be a form of sabotage for people where they go to achieve certain goals and then this kind of holds them back. So, when someone works privately with you, I'm assuming you almost work like an accountability partner where they go to you and they say, you know what, I wasn't feeling good. I ended up, I didn't want to drink, but something triggered me to get back into this lifestyle, the drinking. How do you help them get back on track? What are the certain things besides nutrition, obviously, and giving them ideas on supplements? What other ways can you help them heal and help guide them?
So my company, Functional Sobriety, operates mostly in terms of a community. So we have an online community that has members around the globe. Right now, it's women only. And community is a huge part of this journey, right? It's really hard to do this alone, especially if the majority of the people that you've surrounded yourself with are people who are drinkers, right? Oftentimes, we are not the only one in the group that is drinking like that, right? Everybody's drinking like that. So, community is a huge element, and part of why even programs like Alcoholics Anonymous are as successful as they've been has a lot to do with having community and connection and people who you can relate to and learn from and who share similar experiences with you. So, functional sobriety is an online community that is really a wellness focused approach to alcohol free living. And in the community, we have daily accountability meetings, we have daily content. There are group chats that are kind of going 24/7 of people chatting and talking about, oh, I had this trigger, I had this success, I had this win. And that's really our core accountability piece. I also have a coach on my team that does do some one on one accountability sessions with folks who are interested. My one on one work is actually 100% geared toward people who we do testing on, right? So we're actually doing gut testing, we're doing nutrient deficiency screenings, we're doing hormone tests to basically identify what is going on in the body, how this has maybe been influenced by alcohol. So most of the folks that I work with now are either alcohol free or trying to be alcohol free. And we're really looking at root cause of everything else that's going on in their body. So we're looking at, again, these gut imbalances, these nutrient deficiencies. And it's really helpful for us to identify if there are pieces that are influencing these behaviors, right? So, for example, if I have a client who's drinking mainly because of anxiety, we can use supplements that can support and minimize anxiety, and having her in the community is key. But I'm also interested in learning what nutrient deficiencies she has, what nutrients is she lacking in that are actually that influence dopamine and can be affecting her anxiety, right? How do we get to the root cause of what's contributing to the reason why she's drinking? So we offer kind of a broad spectrum of offers, and we actually also have online courses that help to support people in kind of getting deeper into this work in a self-guided way as well.
That's
Okay.
wonderful. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
We love including a little bit of spirituality in our conversations,
Mm-hmm.
and we live in a magical world. We feel like the universe is always talking to us and guiding us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Reflecting on your journey and this healing journey that you went on, did you experience any miracles and any guidance? And what did that look like for you?
Oh, I experience miracles and guidance every day.
Oh,
I was
Oh.
disconnected from spirituality 100% when I was drinking, and it was something that I craved so much and was unable to find and connect to. And through that process of eliminating alcohol, it cleared that channel, right? I'm now more present in my life. I'm now more connected. I'm more aware. I am more um, in awe of the way that life unfolds and is placed in front of me. And the biggest example of that is this book, because I am someone who kept going to school, kept kind of working towards things, not really being able to see an end goal. And I feel like the minute that I had that kind of download in my life that I was meant to write this book, all those doors unfolded, right? Like that was a moment for me where I was struck, for lack of a better word, with like a lightning bolt of, I need to write this book. I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't know people who were writers. I didn't know how to find a book agent. I didn't know anything about it, right? I literally Googled book agents in New York City and cold emailed a woman who ironically happened to represent another woman who wrote a book on sobriety. And so that for me, I mean, sobriety, alcohol elimination for me was the thing that connected me to spirituality and keeps me on that path today. And I'm really grateful for that. So while it can seem like a and really scary idea and a big, big unknown, that might mean that's why you have to do it or why you have to give it a try.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the why, and I remember you mentioned it in your book as well. You told a story in your book about your trip to Bali, and then how you were sitting there sober, observing all these different types of drinkers, and it really dawned on you, you know, why do we do the things that we do? Do you want to elaborate a little bit or tell that story?
Yeah, well, that was born of, when I first started doing this work and I started embarking on the path of helping others with alcohol elimination, there were some people who drank like I did, right? There were some people who, in the end, were quite heavy drinkers. They were drinkers since they were younger. Ingrid, sounds like you and I would have partied together at some point. But there's also people who would seek out my information and my program, my early programs at the end of 2021, who were very, very different drinkers, like maybe once a week or only weekend drinkers, but they still needed help and support in stopping. So that inspired a lot of the what's behind the drinking archetypes in the book. And that story of when I was in Bali is, here I am looking around at, there's the party group over there, right? These people taking shots and ordering drink after drink after drink. And then there's kind of a husband and wife couple, and he's got his beer and she has her wine, and they're, kind of enjoying it in that sense, right? And then you have people that they order a drink and it sits there and they never drink it, right? And I'm sitting there looking back at this and I'm sober, dead stone cold sober, which, by the way, I broke my foot on that trip at the end of that trip. Speaking of
No.
spiritual moments, I went to Bali to start writing the book, and I spent most of my time there, like exploring and not writing. And then my higher power said, you have to sit your butt down and write this book, so I'm going to break your foot. So I was literally couch bound for 3 months after that.
Oh my gosh.
So
Divine
the irony,
intervention in
the
a
divine
strange way.
intervention. Yeah,
Well, there's
in a
another
strange
moment
way.
that you mentioned in your book where you really hurt yourself at your job, and that sent you on a trajectory.
The injury that I believe you're talking about, the one with my wrist when I was bartending,
Yes.
this was many, many moons before I got sober. This was 2013 that I was bartending and dropped glasses and sliced my wrist open. And I still, 12 years later, have 3 numb fingers from that and a big scar to show for it. But I was definitely, alcohol was in my body when that happened, right? So I don't know how that affected my reaction time of when I dropped these glasses. But I still drank after that, right? Like that wasn't enough for me to say, oh, well, maybe that was a problem, right? Days later, I was back at the same bar, hanging out with my friends with a brace on my wrist. And some of that was influenced by these were the people that I was surrounding myself with, as we were all, that's what we did, right? And not that that is marketing in that regard, but it's important to think about the people that we surround ourselves with. And is this someone who um, brings positive influence into my life, or is this someone who maybe holds me back in some ways? And when we explore the idea of alcohol elimination, we maybe our friendship groups do change a little bit. Maybe we don't spend as much time with this group of people because they're more of drinkers. But ask yourself, do those people have something that you want? Are they living a life that you want to live? Or do you want to live a life that is more connected and spiritual? And, maybe it's with people who are career oriented, or moms who don't drink, or whatever that might be. There's so many other communities and groups of people, but we get so kind of locked up in these old behaviors that it can be really hard to see our way out.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up, because I heard somewhere when we go on this massive lifestyle change, a lot of people that are closest to us in our life, they feel uncomfortable witnessing you go through these changes because suddenly you're unfamiliar to them. They don't recognize you. And I guess sometimes there's a form of sabotage that comes in. Where there's self-sabotage, but there's sabotage on others sabotaging you. So did that happen to you on the journey? Like, did you feel like your friends kind of tried to stop you from progressing, like actively?
No, I distanced myself from anyone that I felt like would be trying to hold me back. Most of my friends were very supportive because they had kind of seen me at the end, and were at the point where they were also thinking like, maybe it's time for you to slow down. But there is definitely a lot of discomfort that is triggered in other people when you change your drinking habits. So, for example, if you have a friend that you always drink around and you decide that you are going to cut back, or you're going to take some time off, um, by you saying that to them, that can be triggering to the other person, right? That then they are saying, oh, well, I've been thinking about cutting back too, or, I don't really drink that much anymore either, right? Like they're feeling like it's an attack on them when really it's just you explaining what you are choosing. And, what I always share with clients now, especially in the world we live in today in 2024, 41% of people are trying to change their drinking habits right now in this country, which is almost half of the country, right? So if you were to say to a friend who you think is a big drinking friend that you're cutting back or you're going to take some time off, there's a 41% chance that that person's actually like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that because I'm trying to do the same too. And I thought that you might convince me to drink, right? So some of it is just communication.
Wow.
Well, you seem to be at the very front of this movement that
Yeah.
is really flourishing and growing in popularity. So thank you for writing the book. Thank you for spreading this message and bringing a holistic approach to this really taboo subject. Like, it hasn't been talked about. People kind of hide it, and they're silently suffering. So I'm glad that you're there to help them. And yeah, again, the holistic approach through the eating and really mindfully looking at what are the triggers, what are the biological systems in place that sabotage us. So
Yeah.
we're incredibly grateful to have you on our podcast and feature your work.
And I'll just say, to kind of build on what you just mentioned about it being something fearful and something that we hide, something that a lot of people feel uncomfortable talking about. And I work with people all the time on this, right? So I see the struggles that a lot of people have, and I've been there personally myself. And it can feel really uncomfortable to stand up and say, I'm not drinking, right? Especially if we've been involved or in these circles with people who drink quite often. But I always challenge people to think of it as a superpower. If you're the only person in this group that can say no to a drink, that is a strength, not a weakness, right?
Ooh.
So it's all about the mindset, right? It's all about the mindset. If you're someone who is growth oriented and want to progress in your life, and you're drinking alcohol a few times a week, several times a month, you're feeling hangovers, there's a good chance if you cut it out or cut it back that you are going to see progress in all of the areas of your life.
That was a beautiful button.
Yeah, I feel like
I
that
think
was.
that was it. That
Put a
was it.
bow on the
Boom,
top.
boom, mic drop.
I love the yeah, mic drop. I love this the superpower. Anyways, thank you, Brooke, so much for being part of this podcast. We love your book, How to Eat to Change How You Drink. So before we leave you, where can our listeners find you?
Yes, so thank you again so much for having me. So thrilled to be here, and thanks for reaching out to have me on. You can learn more about me at brookscheller.com. Also, our programs are all available at functionalsobriety.com, where you can learn more about our community and our courses and all of the ways that we can support you if you're interested in cutting back or eliminating alcohol.
That's wonderful. Thank you so, so much.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay,
So great to be here.
If you enjoyed our interview today, please share and like it.
And if you have a unique story on how you are creatively engaging with the world, we can help you share it in a multitude of different ways. We are experts in crafting stunning photos, videos, and compelling narratives. Our mission is to make you and your brand stand out.
Please visit our website, www.riseupandfixit.com, to learn more and to connect with us.